Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and Showdown preview, or I guess prop preview, out there for this week's Shriners Children's Open. Gonna make sure you're ready for all of your exposure this week. Any questions that you have down there in live chat, a look at a weather report, how that'll impact the first few rounds, and of course, some of my top DFS plays, a few props on Underdog and Prize Picks to get you ready for tomorrow. So first off, welcome on in. If you're on the replay crew already down there in the live chat, I see we have Zach down there. Says curious about the weather. We'll be talking about that extensively, so we'll hold off on that one a little bit. So, and you're saying that the weather hasn't seemed this clear since a while? Yeah, for sure. So we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. But speaking of, I do want to prime the weather talk here with a little look at the averages from last year. So before we talk about this forecast, which I'm sure a lot of you have already looked at, let's take a look at what happened last year. So round number one, it only played about 0.2 strokes under par. After that, it was at least 2 under, so 2.2 under out there on Friday. Pretty much the same thing out there moving day. And then round three played a whole 3 strokes under par. Part of it was the humidity there over the weekend, but also partially with a little bit higher wind out there on Thursday. And if we go through some of the other years of data, this one was relatively flat, but you can see there on Friday only played about 1 under par as opposed to 3 under par there over the weekend. Go over there to 2022, pretty flat, but once again, out there on Saturday, slightly harder conditions. Coincidentally, those are the days where we had the highest winds. Flat out there, 2021, 2020. Also pretty flat, but 1.7 under par as opposed to 3 under. And then you can see 1.75 under par, a whole shot and a half harder than what you had there the day before. The wind really matters at this golf course and oftentimes can lead to a stroke, sometimes even an entire stroke and a half advantage. I know we had a comment before about the Friday forecast, but honestly, tomorrow's forecast is where I think you're going to see most of the impact out there for this weekend. So we take a look at Thursday, and we're not just going to look at the HRRR model here. We're going to go through all the models, and they seemingly all agree on what to expect the next few days. So this is the HRRR model here. You'll see that around 11:12 a.m. Local time over there, so right around noon, the winds start to kick up. It goes from 3 to 5 miles an hour to 11 to 15 plus out there for the afternoon. So I would say that this is a bigger difference than what we're going to get on Friday. But for all of Friday, it is going to be absolutely dreadful. So before we hop over to Friday, though, let's take a look at some of the other forecasts for Thursday. So this is NEM right here. You see it's calm until like 12, maybe 1 p.m. local time there. Then it really kicks up for the at least last 75, 80% of the PM wave. Medio blue, same kind of thing going on here, maybe a little bit less high winds in the afternoon. Like it only goes up to like 11, 12 miles an hour in this kind of forecast, but still significantly higher than what you have in the morning. This icon model is very similar to the first view that we looked at. Right around noon, it goes from non-existent wind to extremely blustery. GFS, a lot of the same, maybe a little bit later on this one. It's coming in around like 1, 2 p.m. local time over here on the GFS model. And then the ECM model is very similar. So what you see out here for Thursday, and we're going to be very complete with this because I'm taking a very drastic stand when it comes to the weather. I am using it more than you could possibly imagine out there this week. So we're going to have to be really certain about what we're looking at here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to this HRRR, go over here to Friday and take a look at all of Friday, which, as I already promised you, looks just horrible out there the entire day. And what I'll say about this forecast in particular is this is actually the GFS model. So the HRRR doesn't go the whole way into Friday. So let's just start with the GFS, which is the best, about 48 hours out. That or NAM are the two that I'm using out there for Friday. You'll see that in the morning, it's not only going to be super windy. They've got 25 to 30 mile an hour wind gusts. Sustained winds. The wind gusts are nearly 40 miles an hour out there on Friday morning, but it's also going to be cool. It's only 48 degrees out there. So not only are you going to be blown off the golf course, whether it's your tee shots, approach shots, even your putting around the green, you're going to have some trouble with that. You're also dealing with 20 miles an hour cooler temperatures. And you may say like, oh, that's always the case out there in Vegas. Not so much. Tomorrow, it's starting around 60 degrees, so a whole 11 degrees higher than what you have over there on Friday, and it's in the mid-60s by the time you get to 8, 9 a.m. It is not like that at all over here on Friday. In fact, it doesn't get over 55 degrees until you get to 10 a.m. local time there. So you're going to have higher winds in the morning on Friday. You can see they kind of go down a little bit as the day goes on. So they go from like 30 miles an hour sustained down to about 25 or less out there in the afternoon. And it's not just this model that's calling for this. So if we go over here to the NEM, which as I previously mentioned is also pretty accurate 48 hours out, in the morning, you've got even more significant wind on this forecast. You can see there it's a little bit stronger in the morning as well. A wind gust for sure, going to be stronger there in the morning wave. And the temperatures are the exact same kind of situation. It's only 49 degrees when they're supposed to tee off. And in the afternoon, it's not that much better. I mean, it goes to like 55 to maybe 60 degrees in the afternoon, but that is still a much better set of conditions, particularly if the winds die down, than what these morning guys are going to face. So I think it's a little bit of a double whammy. I actually think the bigger difference might be on Thursday, where it could be an entire stroke difference between the morning and the afternoon. But on Friday, if anything, these PM guys seem to be getting the better end of it. So we're still over 24 hours out here from this forecast. So there's a lot that could change in a 24-hour period. Of course, our round 2 live stream will be circling back, seeing how this plays out. But if we take a look at some of the other forecasts, so this is Medio Blue, one we haven't taken a look at. You can see the winds are maybe a little bit more consistent out there on Friday, but that's a consistent day on Friday with the temperatures getting warmer as the day goes on. So I would still favor the PM guys in that scenario. This icon model on Friday is calling for slightly higher winds early on than later. Also, the temperatures increasing a solid 13 degrees from AM to PM wave. And then finally, the last model to look at here also has the strongest winds in the first half of the day. And that's maybe not actually the same kind of weather situation going on, at least in terms of temperature. It's a little bit warmer in the morning on this forecast, but still an entire 10, 12 degree difference by the time you get to the afternoon. So the way that I'm reading this forecast, it's pretty straightforward to me. The AM PM wave is getting the better side of the draw, not only out there for tomorrow, which is normally the more important half to consider, because we want to take a look at how tomorrow's forecast a little bit more reliable than what you have on Friday. So that's the main reasoning for that. But it's the same thing out there on Friday as well. So I would say that this is one of the bigger weather edges that we've had for quite some time. And that if you're not looking at it, I showed you countless examples here of the scoring changing drastically from day to day. It has a really big impact on the scoring here. So the way that I see this, I want guys starting early tomorrow and that are finishing late out there on Friday. There could be a delay because of the super high wind gusts that could add a little bit of variance to it, I suppose. But no matter how we look at this, guys, let's say that there would be a delay on Friday. So I just want to throw that out there, because anytime you get 40 plus mile an hour wind gusts, it's at least a possibility that you want to have in the back of your mind. If they delay play on Friday, and let's say that they start in the afternoon or something like that, they're going to play on Friday, right? They're not going to sit out the entire day because of 30 mile an hour wind gusts in the afternoon. If it's 50, like you saw in that one forecast, like they might have to shut it down for a few hours, but they're still going to play on Friday, right? They're not going to completely delay play. I can't see that with 30 mile an hour wind gusts. If we take a look at Saturday, it's much calmer than what we have on some of the other forecasts. So I'm going to look through NEM. We're also going to look at GFS for Saturday, just in case it ends up getting bumped there. And while it's still a little bit cooler early, the winds are much lower than what you have in some of the other forecasts. GFS is a good one to look at over here as well. So similar type of temperature situation going on, but I'd much rather have people playing in 20, 25 mile an hour wind gusts than 30 miles an hour that you have out there on Friday afternoon. So that's the idea. I think no matter which way this ends up happening, that the AM PM side is the side that you want. So my exposure is 90% AM PM wave. In fact, the only players that I'm using in my lineups that are PM AM are going to be core plays that I talked up on Monday. Main reasoning for that, I've already said this before in my channel, is if I talk them up, I'm using them in my lineups. For better or worse, even if I have to lower my exposure on those kind of players, I'm still at least going to use them in a few lineups. So whether it's Kurt Kitayama up top, Tom Kim's an AM PM wave player, I should say. And then I believe it was JJ Spawn is the other player that was in that PM wave. Those are the only three guys I'm taking on that side. And it's probably half the exposure that I wanted before. So I wanted like 30, 35% Spawn. Now it's probably going to be like 10 to 15%, just a little dabble out there in my exposure. And same thing with the other two core plays up top. So I think that this is one of the better slates that we've had for quite some time. If you're somebody that's a fan of a weather edge, and one that I think you should take seriously, especially because all the models are agreeing, right? Sometimes there's variance from model to model and it's not as clear cut. It looks pretty damn clear cut this time around. So whether there's a delay or not, that's the way I'm going with things. And I think it's one to strongly lean into. In fact, if you're out there, you didn't love anyone on a Monday, weren't like me who had a lot of conviction behind guys like a Kurt Kitayama, then you should probably have none of those kind of guys in your lineups. It should all be the proper wave there out there with the AM PM wave. What's going on, Brant? What's going on, Phil? Fall golf is a great grind. I agree it. Cheers to you, Zach. You've had 3 first-round leader each ways from the early starters. So you're going with Moore, a couple Moores there, Ryan Moore and Taylor, and then Gary Woodland at 70-1. First off, the first-round leaders have to be AM wave. So I like that you did that. And then in terms of like the specific guys you chose, I think it's a pretty good Gary Woodland week, but yeah, I have no complaints with those. They seem like reasonable numbers, 180-1, 71 out there in Woodland. And yeah, you're definitely picking the right side of the draw. So no complaints from me, Mark. You definitely have my my blessing with those 3. Let's talk through this slate, though. So if you guys have any specific player questions, just let me know down in live chat. But we're going to go through a few players I wanted to draw your attention to, and every single one of them is an AM PM wave starter, right? Not a single one of them is going to be in the other wave. I already told you there's only a few guys I'm taking from the bad wave, and it takes somebody like a Tom Kim or Kurt Kitayama's ball striking stats to get me there. Or, for example, going to a JJ Spawn, he's the best player in the field over the last 3 months. Those are like the only kind of guys that I'm playing in the bad wave, right? I'm not taking some slapdicks down there in that 7-8K range. So if you loved anyone that was in the bad wave, that's down in like the 6-7K range especially, you probably want to take them out of your lineup. So like, for example, other 2 value plays we had with Daniel Berger and then Ben Coles. Luckily in the proper side of things, so I didn't have to take them out. If these were PM wave players, especially Ben Coles, if he was PM wave, I'd have 0%. He'd be completely out of my player pool. So we got lucky that it was 3 of my favorite plays on the slate that were on the quote-unquote bad side of the draw, but I'm undoubtedly going to have less of those kind of options. An example of a player I'm much higher on now after this weather edge would be Taylor Pendrith towards the top end of the board. And part of the reason why I've got him at nearly 26% ownership, which is much higher than most of you were probably expecting, is because of the weather edge. So we're not the only ones that look at the weather, right? You'd be dumb to think that other people that you're playing against aren't considering the same kind of stuff. And it's pretty clear cut. So I see a lot of people stacking the weather this week. Now, when I say a lot of people, I mean comparatively, right? Compared to most weeks out there in tour, because usually it's sub 3% that are going out there and doing so. This week, it'll probably be at least 5% of lineups that are stacking the AM PM wave. And that's going to have an impact on ownership. Now, it's not going to make those guys like double the ownership, which is probably where they should be, considering the big advantage that they're likely to get. But it is giving them an extra 3 to maybe 5%, like what you have there with Taylor Pendrith. So he otherwise probably would have been like 20% owned out there in contest, but is now going to be over 25% because of that weather edge. So when we talk about lineup construction, we actually build a lineup together here over there on Draftkings. We're going to have to consider that because, you know, if you were going without ownership projections this week, if you were just flying blindly, you'd probably think you'd be about 20%, which is, it's a healthy ownership number, but it's not all that chalky. But some of these guys are going to get ownership. So as I said, not many AM PM guys that you can even play towards the top end of the board. You're limited to a Taylor Pendrith, a Seamus Power, who's in that wave, an Eric Cole, and then that's it for guys that are $9,000 plus. So of the top 11 priced players on the slate, 8 of them are in the bad wave. So I think that if there's a spot to mix in a few of those players, it would be towards the top end of the board. Not only just because it's the best players in the field. I mean, Tom Kim, back-to-back champion, Kurt Kitayama, who's gained over 10 strokes ball striking in 2 of his last 3 weeks. But you also just need to play guys, right? You're not only going to have a 3-man player pool from 9K plus. So that's also part of the reason that I kept these guys out there in my exposure. So in half the other end of that spectrum, right, is because there's only 3 guys to choose from. That's why you have that increase in ownership up top. So guys like Pendrith, Eric Cole, a little bit higher owned than he otherwise would be. They're at just under 20%. He probably would have been like 15, 16% if it weren't for the weather edge. And then Seamus Power too. He probably would have been like 15 to 18% owned, but now he's over that 20% mark just because of that weather edge that we have in play. Let's see. Pendrith is the guy to beat. Okay. I like it. I like the confidence behind that. What is a good process to choose the one guy from the bad wave? your favorite plays on the board. So I kind of just went over that. So hopefully that helps, Kep. But for me, it's guys that you were on Monday and then towards the top end of the board. If you were going to take somebody in that 7-8K range, there's just not a reason for it. You have plenty of players to use in the proper wave. So if you're going to mix in one guy from the bad wave, I guess the first thing I'd say is, why are you doing that, right? I guess you don't even need to do so out there in your single entry lineup. But if you were going to, make it a stud up top. Back-to-back champion, I don't think is a terrible idea to go out there and go with. And like I said, you guys already know I love Kurt Kitayama this week. Yeah, Woodland's your boy. Dude, his shots gain stats have been, I know it's the fall swing, a little easier to gain strokes to the field, but he's been mighty fine impressive. That's for damn sure. All right, so we mentioned Pendrith already. Eric Cole down here, this is one of his kind of courses. So I mentioned Ben Griffin as an outright this week as somebody I really like. Eric Cole's that same sort of player, more of a putting first kind of guy, really good with the iron play, not very good off the tee player, right? That's both of those players' Achilles heels. And then this week, they're not going to have to worry about it as much. It's much more of an accuracy over a distance kind of golf course. So in the proper wave, under 20%, give me a little bit of Eric Cole there. Harry Hall has amazing course history here, so I don't even think it's the best course fit. So when I saw this course history, I was a little bit surprised. But he's gone T26 and then a top 15 and a top 8 finish his last 3 years. So clearly likes the golf course. He's from the area. He plays out of TPC Summerlin. So I guess that there's a little bit of reason to assume that the hometown narrative is working with Harry Hall, because not only does he have that narrative going, but he's backed it up with 3 top 25 finishes. So $8,400. This is by far the best form that he's ever had in his life. He loves these bent grass greens that they're going to be putting on in TPC Summerlin. And on top of that, he's in the proper side of things. So Harry Hall, I was probably going to use anyways if there wasn't going to be a weather edge, but you add that on top of what was already one of the best plays on the slate, and he's going to be one of my higher owned options out there in lineups. Worth noting that my guy Ben Griffin is a core play and out of the AM wave, so I'm going to have a royal fuck ton of Ben Griffin in lineups, because not only is he on the right side of tee times, but he's also maybe my favorite play towards the top end of the board now. JJ Spawn, I'm using sparingly because he's in the wrong side of the draw, but I've already told you he's the best player in the field when it comes to his shots gained metrics over the last 3 months. So again, if there's a guy to take a splurge on, especially like $9,700 Kitayama, part of that's just because there's not a lot of guys to play towards the top end of the board. If there's anyone to go down in 7K range to use, I guess it would be JJ Spawn. I still like an Adam Svensson here. So Svensson is $7,500. Worth noting that Thor Bjornsson ended up withdrawing on Monday, so a lot of you probably already accounted for that. But Emiliano Grillo did withdraw this afternoon as well. So if you didn't know that, make sure you get him out of lineups. But he was also a PM wave player, so it wasn't a massive difference when it came to my exposure. But I actually did have him in my player pool before he withdrew, and that was before the weather edge really came out as well. The player that I took my Grillo exposure and put it on was an Adam Svensson here. He, of course, was in the picture all of last week. He's got solid form heading in. He's also a player that fits this style of golf course. I mean, he's won the RSM Classic. A lot of times he's gone into contention. It's been at courses that aren't that off the tee heavy, because he's not the best off the tee player. He's more of an iron and putting specialist. When he gets hot out there with the approach player, the putter, is when you see him make cuts that get into contention. So I like the course fit this week. I like the form. I like the fact that he got that really good round out of the way, and then, he kind of fizzled out a little bit. Now he doesn't, he's not going to catch as much steam as he would have if he went out there and won the event last week. And he's still very respectable form. He's only $7,500, which I think is very cheap for the kind of form that we're getting, and fits this style of golf. I like myself some Charlie Hoffman. A lot of this is the form. I mean, look at this. Number 7 in the field in recent form ranking. I mean, that is just that's the best form that you're going to find for Hoffman. He doesn't play this well very often. In these desert-style golf courses, waste management, he's made an absolute career at. He's played very well at some of the other desert-style courses that we see on the PGA Tour schedule. And TPC Summerlin has a lot of that same kind of feel. So his course history here, it's not amazing, but it's pretty solid for what he's done the last 4 or 5 years. So 4% ownership, he's more of the kind of leverage option I'm getting to. Like a Svensson here is 12%. That's actually pretty popular for the 7K range. Daniel Berger at over 10% himself. He's actually one of the higher owned options that we have down here, but they're in the proper wave. They've got really good form. I think they're way too cheap, so I'll play those kinds of options. If I'm looking to get different, though, I'm not going to get that with a 12% owned player, right? I'm going to have to get a little bit more different with my ownership, which is where guys like Charlie Hoffman come into play. Maybe they don't project as well as some of the other options. Like, for example, Svensson, 74 points, only a 70-point projection down here for Charlie Hoffman, but he's 3 times lower owned. So there's always a time and place for using these sort of players. If I'm in a single entry or maybe not as worried about ownership because they started with some leverage towards the top end of the board, then maybe I take one of those 11, 12%ers, right? You get away with it out there in your lineup. But if I'm starting chalk here, especially if you're in one of the bigger contests for this week, like the big $5 got like over 20,000 entries, then you might want to consider taking a Charlie Hoffman instead. Moving down a little bit further, we've got Nick Taylor here at 7,100. He was a value play for us last week, one of my highest exposed options. Had a decent event. I don't want to say an amazing event because it didn't have a top finish, but he made the cut and has played a lot better at that tournament than what you saw for the 2 months prior, which was some really piss poor form. So just like Hoffman, he's one of those desert style killers where whether it's waste management, some of the other courses with the same type of visuals going on, he's played very well. So I think there's something to that. We've seen that with Adam Hadman too. Adam Hadman, by the way, he's in the bad wave, or else I probably would be playing him out there in lineups. But a guy that fits the bill and is in the proper side of things would be Nick Taylor here at $7,100. I didn't bet him outright, so if he ends up winning this week, I'll be pretty pissed about it because he was somebody I did bet for an outright last week. So that'd be a little bit of a feels bad moment if that ended up happening. But Ben Cole's here at $7,000. He's Amwave. You guys already know I love him. If you saw my preview earlier this week, he's hitting the ball better than he ever has before. And for whatever reason, he just can't make any putts. He's normally one of the best putters on the PGA Tour. In fact, on this surface is 2/3 of a stroke better per round than his 24-round baseline. So I think it's a really big week for Ben Coles. Rico Hoey here, I actually don't think it's the best course fit for him. I like him at a big hitter's ballpark. He's an extremely long player off the tee. But what I do like about Hoey is that he putts a lot better on the surface. When you get him on Bermuda grass, he has really struggled in at least this first year sample size. But on bent grass, POA, really anything but Bermuda grass, he's a gainer to the field. He's been electric with his irons. That's why he started to show up as chalk in some of these fall series events. And he's only 6,900. He's in the proper wave and only 5.2% owned. So perhaps a diamond in the rough that you could consider. A Haynes Springer here, he's only 2% owned, so certainly a low-owned diamond in the rough that you could use for some leverage. And what I like is the birdie or better upside. He's played well at some of the easier tracks that we played on the PGA Tour. Maybe not the best around the green player, so definitely makes more bogeys than what you're hoping for, but has higher birdie or better upside than almost every other player in this range. So you're giving me a guy that has a very wide range of outcomes, and because he's only 2% owned, he's the perfect GPP kind of option. Now, I probably wouldn't be deploying them out there in a single entry. Any of my higher dollar stuff, just a little bit too much risk with the Haynes Springer skill set. But in a large field GPP where you need leverage and sometimes 2-3 spots in a lineup, he's the perfect kind of option for that kind of contest, right? Because your desired outcome's a lot different than what you have in a single entry where you just want a solid lineup to go out there cash. You don't need the nuts to win a single entry typically. Whereas in the large field GPP, you need the absolute nuts, and somebody that has an extremely wide range of outcomes, that has a high ceiling but a super low floor, like Haynes Springer, is really attractive in that kind of option because he gives you a lot of his top end performances. He might suck a lot too. You might miss some cuts, but he is capable, as you saw with the 59, of going super low. And then the last play I'm going to point out here, again, guys, this doesn't mean that you have to play everyone I'm pointing out here. It's just more so to give you an idea of what I'm looking for in players this week. And a big surprise, another AM Wave player that we're pointing out. But David Lipsky, he's from Las Vegas. He has a lot of familiarity in playing this style of golf. He's played really well the last month or so as well. So in terms of his recent form ranking, he's one of the better options in this range. You've also seen him play well at some of the other courses that are a little bit less off the tee heavy because he's not the best off the tee player. He's a little bit wild off the tee, and he's not the longest player there too. So you get him at a golf course that's more from fairway and in, and that's going to be very beneficial for David Lipsky. So that's what I like about the $6,400 price tag. Essentially unowned as well. So if you need leverage out there in the large field contest, you're going to get that on this sort of player. So, some of these options here, especially like a Berger, a Svensson, some of these top end players, there were some hefty ownership numbers here. I mean, 16, 17%, nearly 20% on Eric Cole. Part of that is a byproduct of the weather edge we're leaning into. But down low, because there's so many players to choose from, you're going to have spots to get that leverage. So that's what I would say about your lineup construction this week, is that up top, you're likely going to be eating some chalk, but towards the middle to bottom end of the board is where you want to avoid some of those high-owned landmines. And let me actually bring up the my projections that are uncensored on another tab here, because I want to give you guys some of the higher owned players down there in that 7K range real quick. So, okay, I got it up here. So see, in the 7K range, you've got a nearly 15% owned Matty Schmid. So Matty Schmid isn't the proper wave, but he is maybe the highest owned player towards the top end of the 7Ks. Svensson, pretty popular. Same thing with Berger. You guys already knew that, though. Ben Silverman, nearly 10%. I've gone to Pan Kazire at about 11% himself. So, I'm playing a few of these kind of players, but what I'm not doing is playing all of those higher-owned players. So I've got a Lauer at about 7%. I've got Andrew Novak at about 8.1%. Novak's PM wave, same thing with Kazire. So in my opinion, those are easy cross-offs. Even a Kuchar, I've got at about 8.5% ownership. So if there are some AM wave guys, like for example, Chan Kim, he's also at about 11% owned out there for this week. If they're AM wave, I'll probably eat that kind of chalk. In fact, I'm playing Chan Kim out there in my lineups. But if they're PM wave, I think that's a good spot to go out there and leverage against the field. So Weather Edge going to help you pick your player pool, but also going to help you pick some of your fades out there in GPP. So hopefully that helps with the ownership. Let's see if there's any questions. And if not, we're going to build a few lineups together. Am I not worried about Ben Griffin's history? No, I'm not. He's a different player now than what he was before. And he has 2 starts here, right? Missed cut and a top 60. So absolutely not, right? It's a 2-event sample size. If it was 5 years of missed cuts, I'd probably be a little bit more worried about it. But like, for example, look at Matt McNeely up here, right? He went T37, missed cut, and then top 10 the year after that. So that's usually the case with every golf course. Outside of the Masters, RBC Heritage has very sticky course history. Kapalua as well out there in Hawaii has some of the stickier course history out there on tour. Outside of those 2-3 examples, it's helpful to have course history. Like, it's great that Harry Hall has had 3 good starts in a row, but that's not the only reason I'm playing him, right? You got to marry that kind of thing up with something else that you're leaning into. So for example, right, Harry Hall, great form heading in as well. So it's not the end all be all for me. And no, doesn't concern me at all. If it was 5 years of that, then maybe. Anthony says, hey, Luke, thoughts on Ramey and Chan Kim, both AM guys. So you may have just missed my thoughts on Chan Kim. I'm playing him this week. He is a little chalky, though. He's about 11% owned. So if you're playing him, just know that you're taking some ownership. He's going to get some steam there out there in the AM wave. Chad Ramey, though, I've got it sub 5% ownership. So I'm really not thrilled by the play with Ramey. I think he's a very average option on that portion of the board, but he's low owned. He is in the proper wave. So, he's probably got to be at least a 7 out of 10 in terms of a play for this week, just because he's checking those 2 boxes. Now, am I thrilled? Am I using him out there in lineups? No, he's not one of my favorite plays, but he does at least check the fundamentals that we're looking for. Let me bring up Draftkings. We'll build a lineup or 2 together, give you guys some insight into what I'm thinking through and actually clicking names together. And a lot of that's going to come down to the contest that we're entering. So just for the sake of the live stream, a lot of this is GPP based, as that's where a lot of my exposure goes. Let's focus on that side. So this will be like for the big $5 GPP, the kind of thought process that I'd be going through. So towards the top end of the board, you're going to be eating some chalk, but depending on how much ownership we're taking towards the top is going to dictate the amount of leverage plays we need towards the bottom. My rule of thumb when it comes to large field GPPs is that you need 2 or 3 pivots depending on your ownership up top. So for example, if you're going with a super chalky Pendrith and then relatively popular Power, and then maybe even your third man in here is a relatively popular Hall or Ben Griffin, players that are going to be well over 15% owned. If you're starting with a core of 3 20% owned players on average, then you're going to need 3 pivots in this kind of lineup, especially if you're in a 20,000 plus entry contest, like the big $5 this week, for example. So if we went with this kind of core up top, our last 3 spots, we need at least 2 sub 5%ers, if not 3 sub 5%ers out there in this kind of build. So towards the top end of the 7K range, this is where you have to force in a little differentiation. So I know Chan Kim, he's in my player pool. I just mentioned that a few times. He's not the best option on that portion of the board just because he's 11-12% owned. We already got quite a bit of chalk towards the top end of the board. So just to go back to my projections, if we're going to the top end of that 7K range and trying to get a little different, there's not that many options to choose from. In fact, you might have to go the whole way down to an Austin Eckroat to get under sub 10% ownership for anyone that's an AM Wave player. So that's actually what we're going to do here. We're going to take an Austin Eckroat at $7,600. He is AM Wave. He is about 6% owned. So not under 5%, but about as close as we could possibly get at this portion of the board. Our next man in, while it would be great to have an Adam Svensson, it's not realistic because he's 12% owned. Again, large field GPP, we need 2-3 pivots if we're starting with some of the chalk towards the top. So maybe rather than taking an Adam Svensson here is where you try and force and get a sub 5%er. So I mentioned Charlie Hoffman before, but a Taylor Moore I've also got at sub 5%. So you could take Hoffman, you could take Moore at that kind of price tag. And there's no one really at $7,400 that's going to get you different. So you might even want to consider leaving salary on the table in this kind of build. If you were going to leave the $200, you might be able to get away with using Berger here. Only reason I say that, he is over 10%. So he's not that much of a leverage play. Only because you're leaving the salary on the table. Almost everyone will max out their salary at PGA DFS. At most, they're usually leaving $100, maybe $200 on the table. But the more salary that you leave, the higher chance that you have of being unique. So I say that you might be able to get away with it. I think it'd be borderline to use Daniel Berger here. But if he went down to $7,200 and you found a slightly lower owned play, then you'd be for sure fine out there in the large field contest. So a Patrick Fishburne could be an example of that. He is 7.5% owned, so I don't have him as a sub 5%er, but because we're leaving that $200 on the table, that's going to give us that extra little bit of differentiation to first off make sure that we're not duplicating ourselves, but also give us some added leverage in terms of our ownership in game theory. So this is the kind of contest or kind of lineup, I should say, that I'd be entering in some of the large field GPPs, especially if I'm starting with more chalk towards the top. Now, if this was a single entry, maybe you use a Daniel Berger, or maybe you even use all of your salary for your last man in here and you play like a Brendan Todd or Silverman that are both AM Wave players. But large field GPPs, your last 2-3 man in are going to be vitally important this week. As I've already mentioned, maybe you're just joining us though. Towards the top end of the board, you've only got 3 players that are in the proper wave that are 9K plus. 8K range, you have a few more to choose from, but towards the top, if you're playing the weather this week, if you're playing smart lineups, if you're going out there, you're taking advantage of the situation that we're getting, you're going to have to take some chalk up there. So that's why I'm so adamant about fading those PM chalky guys towards the bottom end of the board. And if you're going to use the Svenssons, some of the higher end players in this range, like Berger that we mentioned before, I think single entries or smaller field GPPs, maybe like sub 5,000 entries, are where you want to deploy most of those options. Because as I said, you want to lean into the weather where you can, and that's unfortunately going to put you in a pickle when it comes to ownership. See, any questions? Looks like we're going to questions. All right, that's all I've got for the DFS side, guys. So we're going to hop over to props now. If you're just here for DFS, still appreciate you guys hopping by. Just smash the like button before you guys hop on out of here. And make sure to stop on by for the round 2 through 4 live streams, which we'll be doing as per usual this week. But we've got some prop stuff to attend to. So if you're here for that, well, next 15, 20 minutes is the time to be here. So first off, we got the averages from both golf tournaments this week. So PGA at the top, you've got the Euro golf stuff at the bottom. If you want to take a look at these, pause the live stream, pause the replay if you're watching it on replay. But, I'm not going to read these out to you, right? You can see about a 200 par scoring average, 4.6 birdies, 2.7 bogeys. That's about as far down as I'm going to read for you. But you can see all the averages on there. So we'll come back to this when we talk about Euro here in a little bit. But let me actually bring up Prize Picks, which I can't bring up ahead of time because they'll shut me down from even looking at the site if I do. But already got it up. Let's reshare our screen. And there are 2 props I've already entered that we can go through. So these are going to be available either on Prize Picks or Underdog. I personally played them on Prize Picks because they were the first ones to post a board. But Underdog is not going to get that much action from me because they're literally just copy and pasting Prize Picks. And frankly, at this point, the site that's posting props first, that's actually doing their own projections, is the one that deserves to get our action, right? If Underdog's just going to go out there and rip off lines, first off, fuck them. They have zero sense of pride in their own projections. And second off, they don't deserve to be incentivized by us playing props, right? In the past, they've been offering different projections from site to site, which is advantageous for us as a bettor and also just shows that the site is standing behind their projections and whatnot. So the fact that they're plagiarizing Prize Picks, first off, is probably illegal. Second off, I'm just not going to play over there, especially because the payouts are the exact fucking same. So there's just no point to force that in. So first prop we're going to take is here on the PGA side. It's going to be an under on Harry Hall strokes. If you're just joining us, the weather is going to be a big factor out there for Thursday. In fact, let me get over here to the HRRR model, which is the most accurate from 24 hours out. You'll see that in the morning, it is a 9-day difference than what we're going to get in the afternoon. In the morning, it is sub 10 miles an hour for pretty much the entire wave. Somebody like Harry Hall that is teeing off at 7:50 local time is going to be starting around 8 a.m. and finishing just as the winds are starting to kick up. And historically at this golf course, we've seen scoring averages of near 2 under par when it's had calm conditions. So morning wave is probably going to play around this average. You can see 68.76 was the same average actually out there for rounds 2 and 3. If not this round 4 average, that was a whole 3 strokes under par. So no matter which way we look at it, Harry Hall is heading into this event gaining 1.3 shots gained per round over his last 12 measured rounds, which is coincidentally the entire fall swing. He's been lighting it up out there. He's got 3 top 25 finishes in a row at this golf tournament, including a top 10 finish in his first ever start. And he's on the right side of the draw. So 68.5 strokes. He's essentially going to have to gain a stroke to the field to go out there and cover that. Again, it's a par 71. We're assuming a -2 scoring average. And this is a guy that's gaining 1.3 strokes per round heading into this event. So we're just asking him to do what he does on average, if not actually a little bit less than what he's been doing on average lately at a golf course that he historically kills on the right side of the draw. So you can see a lot of different things converging for that play on a Harry Hall. And then I mixed it in with a Euro golf prop. This is the only slip I've gone with so far. So not of a bunch of exposure I'm going with until we get the scoring averages, but probably some stuff I'll add tonight before lock as well. So Patreon place is the place to be to go out there and get all of my exposure. That, of course, as soon as I enter things, I'm going to be posting it over there. And of course, is where you can get the spreadsheet for the DFS stuff. But this under in Thurston Lawrence at 70.5, I took that because first off, he's maybe the best player in this field. I take that back. Jon Rahm is in the field. So he's maybe the second best player that we have in the entire field. He's going off early, which I think is the advantageous side of the draw. It's going to be windy almost the entire day. So let me actually find it for you guys. It's I know where it is on the map, not so much where it is in like actuality. Is it this one up here? No. Is the next one up? It's one of these coastal towns that you have it in. I think it's this one right here. Yeah, there it is. Soto Grande, Real Club de Golf de Soto Grande. This is the course that they're playing this week. And what you'll see on this forecast is that it's pretty much windy the entire day. So unlike PGA, where you had the morning a lot calmer than the afternoon, it's not so much the wind that I think will make it easier earlier, but the receptiveness of the golf course. It should be a little bit more humid early. It's going to bake out a little bit as the day goes on, and that wind starts to touch up the golf course. But the scoring average at this event, let's also show you that here. So there's the Estrella. The Estrella Andalucia Masters is actually the name of this event. When it's super windy out there, they can play a little bit over par, but typically with just a little bit of wind, it plays in the half a stroke under to maybe an entire stroke under par. So if we take a look at 2022, this was a year with a little bit more wind, played over par all 4 rounds. Year before that, same thing, also a little bit more difficult. The thing to note is that it did change from a par 71 to a par 72 though. So even back here in 2022, where it says it played an entire stroke over par, that was before they changed one of the holes from a par 4 to a par 5. So that's part of the reason the scoring was so much easier the year prior, but also with the wind. So if we keep going back, you'll see that sometimes, and this is actually a different golf course. This was Real Club Valderrama. Valderrama, by the way, that's what they play on the Live Tour these days. The most important averages for us to look at would be last year, where, and especially if you look at the data golf projections, they have it at about a half under par scoring average. So if it's going to play to and that would be a 71.5 scoring average. If it played a half a stroke under par, that's asking Thurston Lawrence to gain about a stroke, maybe a stroke and a half to the field to go out there and cover, which is something that he does very regularly on the DP World Tour. He's at least on the world stage, he's not an elite tier player quite yet, but on the DP World Tour, he's essentially a Patrick Cantlay when it comes to his talent level. He's one of the top 10 players over there on that tour. And when he's playing some of his best golf, he happens to be a very streaky player. He's maybe the best player that you have on the DP World Tour. So he's started this year a little bit cold, but towards the latter half of the year, last 2-3 months, has been lighting it up with some of his finishes. You saw that at the Open Championship. I mean, nearly won a fucking major this year. So you know the guy's legit, and he's going off early too. So I took him for an under, took Harry Hall for an under. They do have these on Underdog, but if you're going to play on this slapdick site that is literally copying and pasting stuff from Prize Picks, hey, if it's your only option, then by all means, do you, right? It's obviously not that big a deal. But if you have access to both sites, just play it on Prize Picks, like just out of spite out there for Underdog, because they're being absolutely bitch made by going out there and doing what they're doing. So worth noting too, this over at 4.5 birdies was something I considered taking. They do have him up here for Thurston Lawrence. He is one of the better birdie makers that you have on the DP World Tour too. So maybe you don't like the strokes line as much. You want to go with birdies are better. Honestly, either one would be fine. The one that I played was the under on strokes, but the over on birdies was highly in consideration as well. Have any questions? All right, looks like we're good. All right, guys, that's all I've got for the live stream this week. Stop on by for the round 2 through 4 live streams. Best of luck with all of your exposure that you're getting to. And hopefully we take down a few GPPs, cash out on our prop slips, maybe cash an outright over there too. All of that would be mighty fine nice. But hopefully, even more so important than all of that, we can enjoy some golf out there for this fall swing. So best of luck out there. Appreciate you guys stopping by as per usual. And I'll see you guys for the showdown streams throughout the weekend.